Participants in these pledging sessions have now been invited to bring forward their political commitments on how they want to support free and safe environments for journalists and media workers in their own countries, but also worldwide. And I think we can say it's really a great honor how many ministers and deputy ministers have found their way to this stage for the pledging session, as you can see. And we're very curious to hear more about the measures that they're already taking and the measures that they're planning to take. So, how is this going to work? Let me briefly introduce you to the rules of the pledging session. Each person who's stepping up here to bring forward their pledge to you has 3 minutes. And that will be about the challenge of my work career so far, because we have a very long list, fortunately, of people coming up for their pledges. So I will unfortunately have to interrupt in case you do reach 2 minutes 50. And I will try to do this in a very charming way. And I will just start approaching you. And as soon as I stand about this close, it would really be time to finish. Precedence in the pledging session has been given to ministers and vice ministers who are here in person, which is our great honor. And there are also selected high-level video pledges that will be shown in between. In case you miss 1 or 2 pledges, everything will also be accessible on the website. And with this, it is my great honor to start the pledging session and invite the first delegate to take the floor. So please welcome with me for the first 3 minutes on stage Ivica Dačić, Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Serbia. Please give it up for him.
Hvala puno.
Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It was almost exactly 10 years ago that the United Nations Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists was adopted right here in Vienna. It gives me special pleasure today in the same place that we have the opportunity to recapitulate the results achieved so far, but also to again draw the necessary political attention to this very important topic. The Republic of Serbia sees media freedom as a significant part of its state identity and democratic capacity. We maintain a thorough institutional and a full commitment to ensuring all conditions necessary for the smooth work and development of the journalist's profession. In this context, at the national level, the Serbian government has developed a relevant media strategy aiming to align with the international standards in the field of public information and media. I would also like to point to our efforts being made in implementing the strategy for the development of the public information system for the period 2020 to 2025. The strategy, in addition to analyzing the current situation in the field of journalist safety, also defines concrete measures and recommendations for improving the overall conditions for work of journalists and media workers. Serbia is also a member of the Global Media Freedom Coalition, and during my previous mandate, on behalf of my country, I personally signed the Global Pledge on media freedom at a conference in London. Unfortunately, all countries of the world, including Serbia, have bad experiences regarding the safety of media workers. Intimidation, attacks, and even murders of journalists represent a particular problem we are facing. Serbia took a serious approach to this problem by forming the Commission to investigate murders of journalists, because it is of particular importance to us that such cases be under the special attention of the legislation and that all possible efforts be made so that they do not remain unsolved. In the current circumstances, we need to take into account the increasingly important role of the Internet and the tendencies of manipulation in the dissemination of true information. We are indeed facing huge challenges at the global scale, and it is particularly important to be aware that every reaction of ours needs to be carefully balanced between freedom of expression, privacy protection, and ultimately the very safety of both journalists and the public as the end user of information. Aware of the growing importance of gender equality, we focused additional energy on the protection of women journalists, especially on internet platforms. The government of Serbia adopted a program for women's empowerment in the field of information and communication technologies, where, in addition to schoolgirls and female university students, the target group also includes media representatives, that is to say, women journalists. Also, with the aim of timely response and suppression of all forms of intimidation, an emergency line for reporting threats and attacks on journalists has been activated, which is available 24/7. Serbia attaches special importance to the implementation of the 2030 agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. In this regard, we have included in the preparation of strategic and action documents in the field of information and media a wide range of actors, which, in addition to relevant institutions, include journalistic and media associations, but also the civil sector. We highly appreciate the advisory and technical assistance and contribution of the OSCE mission and EU delegation, which is reflected in the engagement of international experts. Thank you very much.
As you are the role model for everyone else to follow, so I will not hesitate to come closer. Please welcome me on stage with me the next speaker, Elisa Spiropali, Minister of State for Parliament Relations of Albania.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, journalists and civil society representatives, it is with immense pleasure that I take the floor today on this high-level international conference for the 10th anniversary of the UN Plan of Action for the Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity. This year, our system of values has been bitterly shattered, and our assurance is broken by an unprovoked, unjustified, and premeditated war, the brutal aggression of Russia against Ukraine. Russia's war of choice, it is not only against Ukraine and its brave people, it is also a brutal assault against international law, a flagrant violation of the UN Charter, and a direct threat to the European security architecture and democracy itself. We should recognize more than ever the crucial importance of journalists and media in times of conflict and aggression. Safety of journalists in conflict areas is instrumental to that end. I don't want to mention all the names of the journalists, the brave people and journalists killed while reporting on the atrocities in Ukraine, but you can all imagine what it means to not only fight for your country, but to fight for the truth, for freedom, and for democracy. Ukraine is not only fighting for its borders, it's also fighting for us all. There's a vital need to develop tools to more effectively protect democracy from information weapons, while preserving freedom of expression and freedom of the media, both in the countries involved in conflict and more widely. We all agree that safety is not longer an issue limited to war reporters, but now a serious cause of concern for investigative journalists across the world. The Committee to Protect Journalists reported that 274 journalists were imprisoned in 2020, the highest rate since 1992, and also stated that the number of journalists singled out for murder in reprisal for their work more than doubled in 2020, and the figures continue to rise. We believe that free and reliable information is vital for building a transparent and accountable societies. Journalists play a crucial role in maintaining the integrity of democracy, rule of law and good governance by exposing economic injustices and inequalities, human rights violations and abuses, environmental issues, corruption, the decline of political freedoms. I'm going to be very brief. In October 2021, the 8th Southeast Media Conference, I'm not going to kiss your hand, like Mr. Dacic did, but I'm just going to go, was held in Tirana. Dedicated to journalism in times of crisis and organized with the OSCE presence in Albania, this conference brought together journalists, relevant state actors, policymakers with a common goal towards enhancing media freedom and freedom of expression in the Southeast. We know 30 years ago, this would have been inconceivable to imagine in the last Stalinist country in Europe. Having gone through one of the most repressive and restrictive systems in the world, Albania holds it sacred, the right of freedom and expression, as the main tool for the exchange and development of opinions. Do I have 30 seconds?
You have 47 already overstepped.
All right. Well, you know, there's no freedom here, but long live freedom, and I'm very honored to be here today, and we are honored to be part of this conference, and as far as we're concerned, we do everything working together with our partners to make sure that democracy has a meaning through freedom of expression and freedom. Thank you.
Thanks to you. Thank you so much. I don't think I'm going to be very popular after the session. Please welcome on stage with me next. Oh no, actually, this is going to be a video intervention, so I can't step on stage, but I suppose this will be scheduled exactly for 3 minutes. And welcome still Ian Borg, Minister for Foreign and European Affairs and Trade of Malta.
Minister, Excellencies, dear participants, it is a pleasure to join you today for this timely discussion on the safety of journalists, and I take this opportunity to thank the government of Austria, UNESCO, and the OHCHR for organizing this event. As we continue to experience very uncertain times, with freedom of expression coming under increased pressure, the protection of journalists continues to be a global challenge. They often face threats, both offline and online, surveillance, attacks, arbitrary arrest, and detention. The Russian war of aggression against Ukraine caused an unprecedented crackdown on journalists and media workers. UNESCO reports that in the first 6 months of 2022 alone, 44 journalists and media workers have lost their lives. My country has unfortunately experienced such a tragedy with the assassination of journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia back in 2017. 3 individuals have already been found guilty, while others are currently undergoing court proceedings. I wish to stress that we are determined to ensure that all those involved in the murder of journalist Caruana Galizia are brought to justice. Malta is also committed to create the highest level of protection and certainty for journalists to enable them to exercise their right to freedom of expression safely. To this end, we launched a legislative reform based on recommendations from the Daphne Caruana Galizia public inquiry. Through the legislative proposals currently in front of our Parliament and through other further consultation, we seek to enshrine freedom of the media in our Constitution in order to ensure that the media is recognized as the 4th pillar of democracy. The protection of journalists and their sources will also be elevated to a constitutional level. A committee will also be established by law to focus on the protection of journalists and other media professionals. The committee will not only be able to evaluate the risks and threats faced by journalists and media professionals, it will also be able to intervene and implement immediate and long-term measures. Punishments for attacks on media workers will be increased. Finally, we will be one of the first EU member states to include anti-SLAPP provisions in our laws. As Malta prepares to take its seat at the UN Security Council next January, we will continue to prioritize the safety of journalists and media literacy. We will carry on using our voice to call for accountability and justice for crimes committed. We will keep working with our partners to ensure that journalists are protected and allowed to fulfill their fundamental role of holding governments and institutions accountable and keeping the public informed, thereby contributing to enhancement of democracy. Only then will they truly be able to live and work without fear.
Fortunately, this was not me cutting him off this time. Next on stage, Lord Ahmad of Wimbledon, Minister of State at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom.
Before I start, and this shouldn't be my 3 minutes, I'm reminded of a pantomime at Christmas. There's a person who stands at the edge of the stage with a big hook, and as the person runs out of time, they take them up. So we may see a deployment of a rather large hook, but 3 minutes start now. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the 10 years of the UN Plan of Action, the UK reaffirms its commitment to prevent violence, protect journalists, and prosecute those who do them harm. This year, at least 76 journalists were killed for simply doing their job. They knew their risks, the unacceptable risk, yet they carried on doing what they do. Exposing the truth, defending freedom of speech, rewriting to ensure a more democratic world. Their courageous activities must be protected, and we together must defend these values which are fundamentals to the pillars of democracy. Democracy relies upon the free flow of information, independently generated and evidence-based, a healthy information ecosystem. From the Media Freedom Coalition that we helped to build, 50-odd countries now work across the world. In Philippines to Mexico, we are working with key partners, including UNESCO as well as others. Yet, we need to do more. We will also co-chair the Media Freedom Coalition's Media Development Working Group, which focuses on making coalition members support media more effectively. We'll continue to promote the valuable work of the high-level panel of experts, and we will support through monetary support, including to UNESCO, where our £3 million has provided support to 3,000 journalists and 80 projects. A parting thought, if I may. As we work across the world with the likes of Government of Estonia and Access Now, the UK itself, UK journalists are not immune to abuse, and that's why we have a local national action plan. We must end impunity, hold those to account who seriously harm or abuse media workers through human rights sanctions, and we will act in this respect. We will raise our voices at every opportunity. And my final thought to share with you, and we must ponder on this, for if journalists are silenced, if the media is silenced, if we today don't speak for them, who will be left to speak for us? Thank you.
Two minutes 18, certainly no need for a hook, but I'll take up that idea for next time. Thank you so much. Next on stage, I welcome from Germany, Tobias Lindner, Minister of State, Federal Foreign Office in Germany.
Thank you so much. Madam Chair, Excellencies, colleagues, delegates, we have gathered here in Vienna today to reaffirm a joint commitment towards the protection and safety of journalists, a topic perhaps more pressing than ever before. We are marking the 10th anniversary of the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists. We find ourselves, unfortunately, in a world in which spaces for free and independent journalism continue to shrink. While we are discussing this urgent matter today, we see journalists around the world taking immense personal risks to get facts and stories about the lives of people in conflicts and crises published. Over the past weeks, we have been witnessing the brave women and young people who are confronting the brutal Iranian regime in many, often creative, forms of peaceful protests. Being able to see these images is not something we can take for granted, ladies and gentlemen. It is thanks to the courageous journalists, media makers, and free speech defenders who, despite considerable risks for their own lives, enable us to understand better what moves this new generation of young Iranians who so wholeheartedly call for the change through their slogan, Women, Life, Freedom. As Russia continues to commit crimes against humanity in a war that it never should have started, it is a necessity, I would even say an ethical responsibility, to understand in detail what is happening with communities affected the most by armed conflicts. We'll learn about their unbearable, scattered realities through courageous journalists who continue their work under the harshest of circumstances, now even in the face of a grim winter, as well as under the challenge of life in exile. Ladies and gentlemen, these courageous, critical voices within the fields of journalism and media deserve our full support. I am therefore proud that Germany's Federal Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock and State Minister for Culture and Media Claudia Roth have jointly announced the Hannah Arendt Initiative as my government's new program to protect and to support journalists in crises and conflicts. We have named this program after the German Jewish intellectual Hannah Arendt, who once had to flee from Nazi Germany. Her conviction that, and I quote, "the raison d'être of politics is freedom," unquote, reflects the essential aim of this new initiative of my government, to strengthen journalism as an integral part of democracies. During the pilot phase of this program, a network of partner organizations under the Hannah Arendt Initiative is already supporting projects for journalists from Afghanistan, Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. We hope to extend the focus of our work soon. During the pilot phase in 2022, we have invested more than 7 million euros in the support of journalists in crises and conflicts, as well as in exile. Ladies and gentlemen, Germany will continue its commitment towards the protection of journalists. Besides the newly established initiative, we also support action in the framework of the United Nations. Let me recall that UNESCO is the specialized UN agency tasked to promote free flow of information and developing new communication channels. Please let me allow, by using this opportunity, to express our appreciation to the federal government of the Republic of Austria in its leading role to this important portfolio. Our joint efforts to strengthen independent journalism is crucial for the backbone of democracy. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Of course, there was another challenge of keeping up with German punctuality, so I had to intervene there. Please welcome on stage next from Croatia, Krešimir Patel, State Secretary for Culture and Media. Please give it up for him.
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I will try to speak very fast, so if you don't understand me, you can ask me about it later. The Republic of Croatia is signatory to various international treaties and Council of Europe recommendations concerning the freedom of expression and media freedom, and in securing proper and full implementation of the existing media legislation. The amendments of legislation and legislative reforms are being prepared primarily in order to secure the highest standards for all the media operating in the Republic of Croatia, in accordance with the European practices and European laws and regulations currently in force. The Ministry of Culture condemns all actions that would in any way threaten the freedom of expression and media freedom in the Republic of Croatia or threaten any rights granted by the Constitution of the Republic of Croatia. We'll continue efforts to build professional and safe journalism, media freedom and media pluralism, further develop process for providing reliable information about issues of public interest, as well as all measures for establishment and strengthening of the system of fact-checking and verification of the information that circulate public spaces, media, and online platforms, and system for public disclosure of data. I will underline one project which is very important for the Republic of Croatia. We ensured from the Recovery and Resilience Fund 6.5 million for strengthening and establishing of the system of the fact-checking network and verification of the information that circulate public spaces, media, and online platforms. The investment is managed by the Croatian Ministry of Culture and Media and the Agency for Electronic Media. To adequately define the scope and the focus of the investments, the agency commissioned an independent expert study, strengthening society resistance to disinformation, analysis of the situation and guidelines for action. The study provided a comprehensive overview of the global and national media and information context, the exact nature and transnational disinformation and misinformation challenges and their manifestation in Croatia, the potential for automation and application of artificial intelligence in fact-checking and verification, and the key standards, principles, and solutions promoted by the key European and international organizations. The study served as a basis for suggesting the activities that the investment should support. This, first and foremost, promote the need for collaboration between traditional media and independent fact-checking organization, and between practitioners and academic community and other relevant stakeholders. The activities should support the development and application of new technologies, including artificial intelligence, open source intelligence, in the process of journalistic verification and fact-checking. We hope, I see you coming, we hope with this project we'll be able to strive towards professional and free journalism and a well-informed society. Thank you. Am I under 3 minutes?
3:13, but I could still understand you. Please welcome on stage next from Estonia, Mert Volmer, Deputy Minister for Global Affairs.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank Austria, UNESCO, and the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights to bringing us here together in Vienna. And exactly 9 months after we had the third global conference on media freedom in Estonia, in Tallinn. February, it happened, and the world has changed a lot after that, and unfortunately, not for the better. At the pledging session in Tallinn, which was organized in the context of Summit for Democracy, we discussed how critical it is for us to work together to advance democracy, improve media freedom, and protect journalists around the world. And today, Estonia is proud to announce some concrete decisions that have been recently taken in our pledge to protect journalists. Estonia, unfortunately, has first-hand experience of living under authoritarian rule. Without freedom of expression, without freedom of press, we know how crucial free journalists and free media are for the societies. We have seen it firsthand ourselves. And we know how much authoritarian rulers want to silence them. So therefore, we are helping independent media around the world, and in recent months, after Russia's brutal, full-fledged war against Ukraine started, we have helped journalists and offices of independent media relocate from Russia to Estonia. We will continue doing this next year, after a significant number of people have already received assistance in this year, 2022. With this, Estonia is pleased to answer one of the biggest asks from the international community in helping journalists in need to relocate. Therefore, I can assure you we never stopped, and we will continue issuing humanitarian visas to journalists and human rights defenders from Russia and Belarus. We have also reached a concrete agreement in our government of the numbers of resident permits to be issued to journalists at risk after they have accredited by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we know who they are. So furthermore, Estonia will continue supporting media freedom, freedom of expression online and offline, and the work of journalists by contributing to the Global Media Defense Fund, International Fund for Public Interest Media, the European Endowment for Democracy, Digital Defenders Partnership, and CSO Lifeline. So there's a long list of organizations we support already. So in many places of the world, journalists are risking their lives to bring us the truth. So let me full-heartedly thank you all and assure you Estonian support and admiration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much from my side as well, and no need for me to step up. Now we are looking towards South Korea, and there we actually do get a video intervention as well. So we are welcoming Park Jin, Minister of Foreign Affairs from the Republic of Korea.
Bundesminister Alexander Schallenberg, Director General of UNESCO, Ms. Audrey Azoulay, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mr. Volker Turk, distinguished guests. I wish to first thank the government of Austria for hosting this event to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists. In fact, during Minister Schallenberg's recent visit to Korea, our two sides agreed to further advance our 130-year-old bilateral relations based on our shared value of democracy. And this universal value, as we all know, can only be upheld when the safety of journalists and media freedom is secure. For journalists play a critical role in maintaining the integrity of democracy, rule of law, and good governance. And this universal value, as we all know, can only be upheld when the safety of journalists and media freedom is secured. For journalists play a critical role in maintaining the integrity of democracy, rule of law, and good governance. There is no denying that the tremendous resilience and courage of journalists who risk their lives to speak truth to power is a source of inspiration for us all. This has certainly been the case for my country. Journalists have been at the heart of Korea's democratic journey, empowering the public with information and holding the government accountable every step of the way. And drawing on such experiences, Korea has been actively contributing to international efforts to ensure the safety of journalists by supporting the adoption of relevant UN resolutions and commitments, including the UN Plan of Action. Today, however, we are deeply concerned with the growing attempts to silence journalists and media workers around the world. They are increasingly faced with detention, attacks, and harassment, both offline and online, and even deaths, as we witnessed in Ukraine and the West Bank. Yet, a vast majority of crimes against journalists go unpunished. I wish to reiterate Korea's resolute position that attacks against journalists cannot be justified under any circumstances. In this context, as we mark the 10th anniversary of the UN Plan of Action, Korea welcomes Austria's leadership to shine a spotlight on the essential work of journalists and the challenges they face, and in turn, mobilize greater political commitment towards the effective implementation of the Plan of Action to ensure their safety. Going forward, to better protect journalists, freedom of expression, and access to information for all, we must prioritize on strengthening multi-stakeholder cooperation among governments, media, civil society, and the private sector. It is also critical that the UN system make greater efforts to promote a holistic, coherent, and coordinated approach as proposed by the Plan of Action to addressing the safety of journalists and issue of impunity. In closing, I pay tribute to all the journalists and media workers who risk their safety and their lives to safeguard democracy, human rights, and fundamental freedoms. Thank you.
I'm not sure the minister saw me approaching there. So we continue with Armenia, and it is my pleasure to welcome on stage Vahe Gevorgyan, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Armenia.
Excellencies, distinguished participants. First, I would like to extend my deep gratitude to the Austrian government, as well as UNESCO and OHCHR, for organizing this conference and creating a space for a lively debate on human rights in these difficult times for the European security. The truth is known to be a first casualty of the war, and ongoing and evolving crisis of the European security affects freedom of media elsewhere in Europe. Armenia has also been facing extremely difficult security environment for the last 2 years. However, we have been able to answer those challenges without restricting media freedom. Armenia is among few countries wherein one can get access to mutually exclusive information to ensure higher level of pluralism. Media literacy is important in this regard, and I would like to thank OSCE, RFOM, and UNESCO for supporting our national efforts. To better equip our citizens and concerned communities, Armenian National Commission for UNESCO and MFA co-organized national consultations on media and information policies and strategies this March. This year, Armenia has recorded unprecedented progress in the World Press Freedom Index, improving its position by 11 points and ranking 51 on the list. We will keep up with our policy on media freedom, and this is our first commitment that I would like to pronounce today. That being said, let me also refer to our international efforts. Armenia has been a traditional co-sponsor of the resolution on safety of journalists, both in GA and HRC. We believe that international efforts are essential in addressing notable crimes against freedom of expression, including killing of the investigative journalists who expose international corruption schema. Thus, we will be continuing with our efforts to advance cooperation, accountability, and justice, both at national and international level. Ladies and gentlemen, international humanitarian law specifies that journalists who are engaged in professional missions in areas of armed conflict must be considered as civilian and must be protected as such. Thus, intentionally targeting journalists in the event of armed conflict is a war crime. Such war crimes have been recorded in 2020 during large-scale war initiated by Azerbaijan against Nagorno-Karabakh, including the one when journalists seeking shelter in the church were targeted by Azerbaijani armed forces. Same pattern of behavior we saw in the recent aggressions against the sovereign territory of Armenia. War crimes need to be punished. Armenia is willing to cooperate with all interested parties to defend journalists under IHL and elaborate workable universal mechanism for protection on the ground. I thank you.
I thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. We continue with Qatar, and there it is my pleasure to welcome the Assistant Foreign Minister, Lolva Rashid Al-Khater.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on the 11th of May 2022, a team of journalists arrived in Jenin to report on a raid by Israeli occupation forces on a refugee camp. They had years of experience on conflict reporting, dedicating their lives to make sure they amplify oppressed voices. On that morning, the team wore their press jackets, as you see in the photo, and made their way to an area safe enough to report. Within 2 minutes, two of Al Jazeera journalists, Shireen Abu Aqla and Ali Al-Sammoudi, were shot by IOF forces. Shireen's injury, a shot aimed at her head directly, proved fatal. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the protection of journalists is of prime importance to the State of Qatar. We have thus taken a number of concrete measures at the domestic and international levels, from evacuating hundreds of journalists from Kabul since the events of August 2021, the hosting of the International Conference to Protect Journalists in 2012, and the launch of the Universal Declaration for the Protection of Journalists in Doha in 2016. Qatar also sponsored the first UN Security Council resolution on protecting journalists in armed conflict situations, which was adopted under Qatari presidency of the Council. It is thus, in this regard, that we strongly condemn the assassination of the Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Aqla. We reaffirm that Israeli occupation forces' failure to explicitly acknowledge its crime is an attempt to escape criminal responsibility. We call for an independent international investigation and accountability for those responsible for this heinous crime, which we believe is key to achieve justice and also prevent recurrence. And here, I would like to quote a few words from the family of Abu Aqla, whom I met a few days ago. They wanted to make sure that you, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Hear these words, and I quote, "Shireen relied in her report on facts and conveyed the voice of Palestine and its people to the whole world, which made her a role model for a large number of Palestinian women to follow in the field of media. The Palestinian people stood in dignity and united during her funeral. Unfortunately, the occupation attacked the mourners without any reason and stormed the French hospital in Jerusalem, also without any reason. Shireen was targeted while fulfilling her professional duty as a journalist, working on covering events and reporting them to the world. She sacrificed her life, and this is another reason for the international community that they must confront and hold Israel accountable no matter what." End of quote. And here I conclude, Shireen dedicated her life working to shed light on the atrocities committed against the Palestinian people. She is one of more than 45 Palestinian journalists killed directly by the Israeli occupation since the year 2000. We must work together to ensure that journalists, especially those working in conflict zones, are protected and that no exceptions are made. No exceptions are made when we hold those responsible accountable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And maybe let's just take a breath. I think we do hear a lot of serious information here, and sometimes it really takes a moment to digest. We have already heard 10 pledges, and there are more pledges to come. So maybe also roll your shoulders. Make sure that you still have the energy and that we can hear the energy in the applause when you welcome the next speaker on stage with me. From Finland, the State Secretary to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Johanna Sumuvuori.
Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear friends, safety of journalists is closely connected to the core values of democracy. An attack against a journalist is at the same time an attack against the rule of law, against freedom of speech and the media, and in the end it is an attack against democracy. In Finland we do have a human rights-based foreign and security policy, and we are very concerned about the worsening trend of safety of journalists across the world. The number of alerts submitted by civil society and media organizations concerning journalists being harassed, attacked or imprisoned continues growing. The latest UNESCO Director General's report on the safety of journalists and the danger of impunity shows that the impunity for crimes against journalists remains unacceptably high despite a slight decrease. The report also shows that there are no safe spaces for journalists, as the majority of journalists were killed outside the workspaces, and as journalists have become less safe also in countries not experiencing armed conflict. Also, journalists are increasingly killed while covering protests. Finally, the report shows that there is a worrying increase of women journalists that have been killed. Russia's ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine provides yet another tragic illustration of the vulnerability of journalists in conflict situations. The recent OSCE Moscow Mechanism report showed that journalists and media actors are reportedly being directly targeted by the Russian forces as part of their attack. Numerous reporters have been killed since 24th of February 2022 while carrying out their journalistic work. Many have been detained, abducted, kidnapped, and mistreated by the Russian armed forces. And still, so many journalists and media workers in Ukraine and elsewhere continue to risk their lives every day to share stories that the world needs to hear. We need to strengthen our efforts to defend and support independent journalists also in the newly occupied areas of Ukraine. Ensuring accountability for all crimes committed by the Russian forces in Ukraine remains a priority for Finland and for the European Union. Protecting journalists is a requirement clearly enshrined in the international law. UN Security Council Resolution 2222, adopted in 2015, and international humanitarian law require that journalists are protected during armed conflicts in the same way as any civilian. In the OSCE, the ministerial decision on safety of journalists reiterates this obligation. Finland is a member of a group of friends of the safety of journalists both in UNESCO and in the OSCE. Finland is also a long-standing donor and a member of the Council of UNESCO's International Programme for the Development of Communication and a member of the Media Freedom Coalition. Let me highlight here in particular the work done to ensure safety of women journalists online and offline, including online harassment. Journalists and media actors who identify as women are far more exposed to attacks online than their male counterparts are. And Finland is also at the moment the leader of UN Generation Equality process and committed to advocating for the inclusion of preventing and eliminating online gender-based violence in relevant international fora, for example in United Nations and OSCE. In order to respond to growing challenges to both media freedom and internet freedom, we need to further strengthen the global coalition of states and other stakeholders. The Freedom Online Coalition is a leading intergovernmental body that promotes and protects open and secure internet for all. And we had the honor to chair this unique and important coalition during its 20th anniversary last year. To conclude, at the same time, it is important to remember that possibilities of technology and digitalization. When designed and used responsibly, technology can also help detect online harassment and violence to support survivors. So let's protect safety of journalists. Let's protect democracy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I've rarely been that close to so many state representatives at once. Next on stage, from Bulgaria, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, please welcome with me Kostadin Kochabashev.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me first extend my sincere gratitude and appreciation to Austria for hosting this event, as well to UNESCO and the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights for their firm commitment to promote media freedom and safety of journalists. Ensuring the protection of journalists is a leading priority in Bulgaria's policy in the field of human rights. My country is an active member of the Media Freedom Coalition since its launching. We also cooperate with international mechanisms working on human rights, such as those in the Council of Europe and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. In addition to the strong political engagement, Bulgaria allocates funds for international projects aimed at ensuring a safe environment for journalists. In both 2021 and 2022, we have co-sponsored a project dedicated to the security of female journalists online, which is implemented by the OSCE representative on the freedom of the media, Mrs. Teresa Ribeiro. On a national level, the relevant Bulgarian authorities are dealing with each case of violence against journalists with utmost seriousness. The political will to bring to justice the perpetrators of such crimes remains as strong as ever. My country takes actions to improve the legal framework while also addressing the recommendations of the international bodies. In September 2022, the Bulgarian Council of Ministers adopted a decision proposing amendments to the Penal Code. They would establish an administrative penalty instead of criminal liability for insult or defamation of public authority figures. The amendments would also abolish the minimal threshold of fines, thus protecting freedom of expression and limiting the possibilities of imposing excessive sanctions. We are also planning to organize specialized training programs for police officers, prosecutors, judges, and lawyers in order to support their role in protecting and guaranteeing freedom of expression. The Ministries of Interior's police departments will appoint contact points to allow journalists to submit signals or request assistance when it's necessary. Among the other envisaged measures are the regular data collection of the judiciary regarding the number and the nature of the cases brought against journalists and the setup of a register of media law professionals. Ladies and gentlemen, this year we have marked the 10th anniversary of the United Nations Plan of Action on Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity. It provides us with the opportunity to take stock of what has been achieved, to adapt to the new realities, and to reinforce our common actions. Being mindful of the challenges lying ahead, Bulgaria remains strongly committed to the goals of this strategic document. My country looks forward to support all international efforts addressing the issue of safety of journalists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much from my side. Next on stage, please welcome Ireland, the Minister of State at the Department of Tourism, Culture, Arts, Geeltacht, Sport and Media, Czech Chambers.
Good afternoon, ministers, distinguished panellists and participants. I'm delighted to have this opportunity today to pledge Ireland's commitments to the safety of journalists and thank Austria for hosting this timely conference. 10 years on from the endorsement of the UN Plan of Action on the safety of journalists and the issue of impunity, it is good to meet and reflect on these issues together. While there's been progress, Ireland is deeply alarmed by the significant worldwide escalation in both the scale and intensity of attacks on journalists and media workers. Too many journalists have been detained or imprisoned without due process or been subject to harassment, intimidation, violence and even death. Journalists who are women are subject to high levels of misogynistic abuse online and offline in particular. We cannot afford to overlook attacks against journalists anywhere. We were deeply saddened by the death of Pierre Zakrzewski, an Irish journalist who was killed while on duty covering the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Journalists like Pierre shine a light on the truth from the front lines on the world's crises. Freedom of expression and the freedom of the media to investigate and report without fear of reprisals has never been more vital. It is the very lifeblood of democracy. Our nation has long been a proud champion of the freedom of the press, freedom of association and civic space. Domestically, Ireland has strong protections in place for freedom of expression and is proud to have been ranked 6th for press freedom in the Reporters Without Borders 2022 Index. Since then, Ireland's Minister for Justice published the comprehensive report on the review of the Defamation Act 2009 in March, and we've begun work on new legislation to reform Ireland's defamation laws. Internationally, Ireland and its EU partners actively support and provide legal assistance to journalists working under threat in hostile environments. We also support quality journalism and encourage cross-border cooperation between media professionals as well as the reinforcement of self-regulatory bodies. The promotion of press freedom and civil society space has formed a key tenet of our UN Security Council membership, and we are committed to promoting and protecting the right to press freedom through our overseas missions and in relevant international fora, including the United Nations, the Council of Europe, and the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. We work closely with international partners to ensure free, safe and enabling environments for journalists and media workers. This year, Ireland is joining new intergovernmental partnerships to defend media freedom where it is under threat. In January 2022, Ireland was proud to become a member of the Media Freedom Coalition, and this October we were pleased to endorse the International Partnerships for Information and Democracy. We are currently giving active consideration to new funding relating to press freedom and the safety of journalists, and I expect to be able to make an announcement on this shortly. And in conclusion, we pledge to continue to collaborate with international partners at all levels and across a range of fora to safeguard the safety of journalists, and look forward to building on the important outcomes of this conference. Thanks very much. Thank you.
I love it that every time I step on stage, the next word is in conclusion. Please welcome on stage from Romania, Director General for Communication at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Andrei Bogdan Tarnea.
Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, On behalf of Romania, let me first thank our hosts, the government of Austria, at this important time. We've heard this morning on this stage to what point in current times propaganda represents a threat to the freedom of media. It's in fact a threat to freedom, full stop. And no better context, unfortunately, than an unprovoked and unjustified war to see that in full swing. Because as many of us know, this war didn't start in February 24th this year. It started in 2014, and it continued online specifically with action based on propaganda, based on influence campaigns that have undermined our information space. We live in times where freedom of speech and freedom of media, journalism and journalists are threatened by what is called these days as either information decay or information disorder. So in that sense, let me present the pledge of our government with regards to freedom of media, safety of journalism, and journalists. Predictable and lasting democracy is achieved through building resilience and having a proactive posture in securing democratic institutions, processes, and culture. As a democratic state, as an EU and NATO member, Romania has internalized a model based on protecting and promoting democracy, human rights and fundamental freedoms, rule of law, free market and trade, as well as acting in the interest of our own citizens at home and abroad. In an era marked by what I just mentioned, this includes and requires vibrant and resilient media environment in face of the major challenges brought about by economic and technological changes, as well as aggressive attempts by authoritarian, illiberal, and anti-democratic state and non-state actors in their attempts to diminish the role and impact of a free press and the activity of journalists. So in that context, Romania promotes media freedom, respect for professional rights, ensuring the physical safety and editorial independence of journalists, as well as a set of actions and a culture fostering media relations based on democratic values and mechanisms. We support integrated efforts to increase media resilience in a dynamic information space and promote partnership with relevant actors and institutions internally and externally, such as OHCHR, UNESCO, or the Council of Europe, that promote media freedom, freedom of expression, simultaneously with efforts aimed domestically at protecting the safety and editorial independence of journalists. Romania stands for free and strong media and will strengthen the monitoring and enforcement of legislation and standards, ensuring the accuracy of the information and news presented in the visual media. This includes both the information provided by relevant public institutions and respect for ethical rules in order to prevent emotional distress generated by malign interferences. Just to give a couple of examples of the activities of Romania at home and abroad, we've committed through the European Endowment for Democracy 300,000 euros for the development of independent media in Moldova, 200,000 for civil society independent media in Belarus, as well as 2 million earmarked from the 100 million bilateral aid for the government of Republic of Moldova, specifically for development resilient public media. With that, I conclude. And again, congratulate the organizers and the participants and remind all of us, as we've heard this morning, that not only journalists, but journalism as an important element of freedom is at stake here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Let's now direct our sight towards Canada, where we are receiving a video message from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada, Mélanie Joly.
Thank you to our Austrian host for this conference. As we meet today, journalists in Iran are bearing witness to the regime's illegal crackdown on freedom of expression. Journalists around the world are putting their lives at risk to shine a light in the dark corners of corruption, oppression, and persecution. Now, more than ever, we need the work of those on the front lines. And now more than ever, we need to ensure that journalists can do their work freely and safely. Canada will continue to work alongside the international community to safeguard the essential work of journalists around the world in line with the UN Plan of Action. Canada is a proud co-founder and co-chair of the Media Freedom Coalition. Our unity is our strength. Although Canada's co-chairship will end this year, of course we will remain an active and committed member of the executive group. We will continue to take prompt action and respond to attacks against journalists. And we will continue to provide refuge to those who fight for human rights around the world. This year alone, Canada has already welcomed 270 human rights defenders and their families. But we can and we will do more, because journalists and media workers around the world continue to need our support and commitment. Canada looks forward to working toward the plan of action with the international community to ensure journalists can do their essential work freely and safely. Merci à tous pour votre participation et votre engagement. Au plaisir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Next on stage, we are moving towards Moldova. The Director for Multilateral Cooperation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and European Integration. Please welcome with me, Victor Lapușneanu. More or less.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, freedom of expression, media freedom, access to information and safety of journalists represent not only a fundamental right, but also an essential element of democratic governance and rule of law. The right to freedom of opinion and expression, the prohibition of censorship, as well as the right to access to information are enshrined in the Moldovan Constitution and relevant pieces of legislation dedicated specifically to this issue in line with EU directives and international commitments and obligations. The Law on Freedom of Expression and the Audiovisual Service Code, adopted in 2018 with the support of the Council of Europe and the EU, provide the guarantees for free exercise of expression by the media and the principles of independence and non-interference by the state in editorial activity, the protection of journalists, the protection of the confidentiality of journalistic sources, and the transparency of media ownership. This year, Reporters Without Borders ranked Moldova on the 40th place out of 180 countries in the World Press Freedom Index. That is 49 positions better than the last year. We continue working on strengthening the democratic processes, and substantial steps are taken on countering disinformation and propaganda, building a strong and resilient civil society and mass media. We are further committed to improve the protection of journalists, better address threats and violence against media professionals, and foster early warning mechanisms and response capacity. Along the same lines, the Republic of Moldova joined and further supports the Council of Europe platform for the protection of journalism and the safety of journalists as one of good practices on improving monitoring and reporting. While acknowledging key advancements in the implementation of the plan of action over the past years, we cannot overlook the trends of regression on the safety of journalists. The military aggression against Ukraine has directly impacted the lives of many journalists and endangered hundreds of others. We condemn this aggression and express our deep concern about the situation of all journalists and media workers. Finally, we strongly support the work of a free, independent and impartial media online and offline as one of the essential foundations of a democratic society and an essential condition for its progress and development. Thank you for your attention, and words of gratitude go to the Austrian government for hosting this important event. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we move to Luxembourg, where we welcome the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Luxembourg to OSCE and the UNESCO. Please welcome with me Nadia Ernstner. Hervorragend.
Mesdames et messieurs.
Ministers, Director General of the UNESCO, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to repeat here how safety of journalists and media professionals is essential, a vital element for democracy. We're all deeply grateful to those who risk their health, their freedom, their lives in the name of media pluralism and free information. We need them so much at the time of fake news, of deliberate disinformation, and of intolerable attacks against journalists and their teams. Now more than ever, we must move on from words to actions. Luxembourg is a member of the Group of Friends on the Safety of Journalists within the framework of UNESCO and the Council of Europe. And we will remain strongly committed to this issue in many other international fora too. At UNESCO, we stand for a mandate on the Executive Board for the period 2025 to 2029. Here, Luxembourg will contribute in particular to the work on freedom of expression, as well as the safety of journalists and media workers, especially women. Luxembourg is among those states who actively support the multi-donor program on freedom of expression and safety of journalists and the international program for the development of communication. I would also like to salute its chairperson, Anna Brandt, who's here. We have been making an annual contribution of 100,000 euros to the IPDC since 2019, mainly for projects training women, especially in Afghanistan. And I'm pleased to announce that Luxembourg has just decided to allocate another 100,000 euros to the work of the IPDC for 2023. Luxembourg will also continue its commitment through 2022 to 24 at the Human Rights Council. In this context, we have granted almost 22,000 euros to the Global Media Defense Fund. At the Council of Europe, Luxembourg will continue to support a platform to promote the protection of journalism and the safety of journalists, to which we have allocated almost 80,000 euros over the past 7 years. Also at the OSCE, we have supported the Representative on Freedom of the Media Safety of Women Journalists Online project with a contribution of 35,000 euros. In addition, our government has been providing technical assistance to NGOs in the Balkans for many years, which contribute to the fight against disinformation and hate speech. Currently, we're supporting the Center for Research, Transparency and Accountability, Better News in Serbia, and the Civil Center for Freedom in Northern Macedonia, with 175,000 euros for the period 2022 to 2020, and I commend their remarkable work. In line with Luxembourg's ongoing commitment to this region of the world, we will continue to support NGOs active in this field. In conclusion, I would like to draw your attention to the OECD Ministerial on Democracy and Public Governance that will take place in Luxembourg from 17 to 18 November. Media freedom will be a particular focus, and I invite you to consult the Luxembourg Declaration and the action plans that will be adopted by our ministers, which will include the establishment of a hub to combat misinformation. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you to the organizers for a very interesting event.
Thank you so much. This is turning into quite a bit of a speed talking competition that you're certainly winning. We are now moving on to the United States, where I welcome the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the US to the UN Human Rights Council, Michelle Taylor.
I'm going to dispose of some of the formalities for fear of the hook, but I would like to thank the Austrian government for fulfilling their Summit for Democracy commitment to organize this event. And of course, their partners, UNESCO and OHCHR, with which my team and I work very closely in Geneva. I'm honored to represent the US here today. As the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists highlighted, serious threats remain to the safety of journalists and their ability to report on matters of public interest. I've experienced a taste of this myself closely. My daughter, who traveled the globe studying women's health through photography, once came across a peaceful protest where a young man was being severely beaten. She attempted to photograph this, and the perpetrators threw noise-making explosive devices at her in an attempt to stop her reporting out what she saw. Thankfully, her hearing loss was temporary, and the photographs did make it out to the press. Safety of journalists is a necessary component of free, independent, and sustainable media that undergirds healthy societies and democracies. The United States is committed to media freedom and making substantial relative investments. We were delighted to join the political declaration here today. At last year's Summit for Democracy, President Biden announced supporting free and independent media as a pillar of democratic renewal, committing up to $47.5 million for programs that support these efforts, which includes programs and partnerships that enhance the safety of journalists. We are implementing this commitment. Respect for freedom of expression is a bedrock of healthy societies and under threat in many parts of the world. The rate of impunity for those that kill journalists is a staggeringly high 87%, as we have heard. And journalists face threats posed by repressive governments' use of new sophisticated spyware to survey journalist activities, which can encourage self-censorship and chill media freedoms. Putin and his government's actions, tightening already expansive control over Russia's media, including banning public access to major social media platforms and cracking down on virtually all independent media outlets in the country, are a direct affront to freedom of expression. While journalists routinely face intimidation, harassment, and violence, both online and offline, for reporting the truth, women journalists are disproportionately targeted. Many women in journalism face multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and gender-based violence. We recognize the seriousness of these threats, condemn the extraterritorial targeting of journalists and media workers, and call upon states to join the United States in protecting journalists and media workers from strategic lawsuits against public participation, or SLAP, for any of you that I heard murmuring earlier about what SLAP stands for. We look forward to working with all stakeholders committed to ensuring the safety of journalists and respect for human rights. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's now direct our attention to a video that we have received from Peru, from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Peru, Cesar Landar Arroyo.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed an honor to participate in this important high-level international conference, which is entitled Safety of Journalists, Protecting Media to Protect Democracy. Peru completely shares this premise and the importance through serious and responsible investigative journalism and the part that work plays in our democracy. Indeed, freedom of expression of the press are fundamental components of the exercise of democracy. Peru therefore recognizes the fundamental part played by journalists in the consolidation and preservation of our democracies, and transparency in the exercise of state activity, as well as the fight against corruption, abuse of authority, and serious human rights violations. Ladies and gentlemen, violence against journalists and the media directly affects the right to freedom of the press and freedom of expression. And it can have an extreme impact on the personal integrity or the life of those active, while at the same time violating the public's right to such information. It's therefore up to the state to guarantee that the exercise of journalism and in general freedom of expression is carried out freely without any form of discrimination and in an environment that's favorable to its objective and transparent action. To that end, we must act with due diligence in the face of acts of violence or intimidation against those who carry out such activity, adopting the necessary steps so that violent acts that violate their rights are investigated and, if necessary, prosecuted and punished, guaranteeing their right of access to justice. I'd like to stress that the safety of journalists and the fight against impunity should not be confined to merely taking measures after the fact, but that it's also necessary to implement prevention mechanisms and strategies to address the root causes of violence against journalists. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that in the context of this event, it's also relevant to note that Peru is concerned about monopolies in the ownership and control of the information media, which would restrict the plurality and diversity of information necessary for the fullest exercise of the citizens' right to information, thus threatening democracy. At the hemispheric level, this concern has already been addressed by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. The advisory opinion OC 5/85 of November 1985, and it was recently taken up by the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, Mr. Pedro Vaca Villarreal. Indeed, the latter highlighted in the preliminary observations to his recent visit in Peru in May this year that the principles on freedom of expression, item 12, state that monopolies or oligopolies in the ownership and control should be subject to anti-monopoly laws because they conspire against democracy by restricting the plurality and diversity that ensure the full exercise of the citizenry's right to information. End of quotation. And thank you.
I understand it's always a bit weird to clap for a video. Nevertheless, please make sure to make a round of applause for the next in-person speaker who's here on stage with me. Please welcome the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Ghana in Vienna, Philbert Abaka Johnson.
Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I'd like to thank the government of Austria, UNESCO, OHCHR, on behalf of the government and people of the Republic of Ghana for hosting this important conference. Ghana aligns itself to the aims and objectives of this conference and supports efforts towards enhancing the safety of journalists in the performance of their jobs, regardless of where they may find themselves. We believe that the protection and safety of journalists is a collective duty of the broader public and the international community. Consequently, it is appropriate and of great value to instill new energy into the implementation of the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity. Ably led by President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, Ghana is determined to end impunity against journalists in all forms, and also to ensure that journalists, no matter their sex, creed, or ethnicity, fulfill their potential in dignity and within a healthy environment. We have deployed significant efforts to create a conducive working environment for the media in Ghana. Under Chapter 12 of the 1992 Constitution, there are very elaborate and progressive provisions for media independence and freedom, which have led to significant changes in the media landscape in Ghana. The repeal of the criminal libel law in July 2001 under the then Attorney General and Minister of Justice, current President of the Republic, has also contributed significantly to the deepening of democracy in the country and has enhanced public accountability as a strategic goal of public policy. Ghana recognizes the right to public information as a human right and has accordingly made provisions for the passage and implementation of the Right to Information Act in the 1992 Constitution, which in essence promotes the safety of journalists and their freedom in accessing information from any public institution and the relevant private sector. Sustainability of private media is crucial, and as a result, media organizations in Ghana today function successfully under sound political and legal conditions. To a large extent, journalists in Ghana work devoid of interference or fear of violence, and media firms enjoy stable legal and business conditions. In furtherance of media freedom and ensuring the safety of journalists, the Office of the Coordinated Mechanism on the Safety of Journalists was commissioned on 4th May 2021 to handle cases of attack on journalists. The safety of journalists in Ghana is to be considered sacrosanct according to the President of the Republic, who has stated vehemently that he would not condone any attack on any media practitioner, irrespective of offense committed. The moderator just disrupted me. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, with these remarks, I would like to conclude by reiterating Ghana's support for the implementation of the UN Plan of Action on the safety of journalists and the issue of impunity. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much. And with this interruption, it was also important to enforce your message to make sure everyone can hear you. Please welcome on stage, you're already here. I now have to speed up a bit. Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Lithuania in Vienna, Vaidotas Verba.
Thank you, ma'am. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants of the conference. Free media is a key prerequisite of any democratic society. The role of the free media is especially vital in the context of Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, the violent crackdown of protesters in Iran, and other conflicts around the globe. The international community and every state are responsible for creating a safe and enabling environment for critical work carried out by journalists and other media workers and addressing impunity for attacks for them. Lithuania remains committed to protecting and promoting media freedom and pledges to take further action to increase the international community's support for free media, counter growing threats of media freedom, and tackle information manipulation. As an active member of the UN Human Rights Council, the Media Freedom and Freedom Online Coalitions, Group of Friends for Safety of Journalists, the International Partnership for Information and Democracy, and other international initiatives, Lithuania encourages the international community to advance global standards of the safety of journalists and media workers. We continue to advocate for strengthening monitoring, evidence gathering, and accountability mechanisms. On the national level, an action plan for implementation of the EU guidelines for protecting journalists and other media workers helps to ensure smooth coordination between the relevant ministries, law enforcement, the judiciary, and the local and national levels. Lithuania is committed to providing practical support, including visa assistance to independent journalists and media workers suffering from persecution by authoritarian regimes and looking for a safe place to live and work. Vilnius, my capital, has become one of the independent Russian and Belarusian media hubs in exile for journalists fleeing Lukashenko's oppression and Putin's wartime crackdown on media freedom at home. In the light of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, it's crucial to ensure that journalists and media workers are able to carry out their work safely. For this reason, Lithuania will continue to support projects improving journalists' skills of working in dangerous environment. Lithuania shares a strong commitment to actively tackling disinformation. Partnering with the civil society and media organizations, we will further build resilience and trust in quality independent media, boost media literacy, and raise civic awareness. Lithuania is proud to contribute to international effort to protect and promote the safety of journalism and other media workers. I'm very proud to be ahead of time, saving some minutes for you. Thank you.
Announced and already finished before I have to step on stage. These are my favorites. Thank you so much. And also, I think it's really worth acknowledging the true internationality of this pledging session. So from Lithuania, we're moving on to Colombia, and there I present the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Colombia in Vienna, Miguel Camilo Ruiz Blanco.
Excelencia.
Your Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the government of Colombia, I would like to thank the Republic of Austria for having organized, in cooperation with UNESCO and the OHCHR, this high-level conference on the safety of journalists, protecting the media to protect democracy. As indeed stated on preliminary days, Antonio Gutierrez has underlined the fact that free press is vital for the smooth operation of democracy and furthermore to make headway in terms of the SDRs. And though in the context we have made headway in terms of implementation, we still see that there are many attacks and assaults on journalists and that most of these crimes have not been solved. On the occasion of the 10th anniversary of the Plan of Action, Colombia would repeat that it is committed to the safe and secure environment for media workers and journalists in the defense of human rights and the truth for all. And this is why Colombia announces that it is clearly supporting the political declaration, which is the result of this meeting. Colombia reiterates its principles of being in full commitment to all measures taken to protect journalists, considering that they are key elements in terms of strengthening democracy and freedom of expression, as well as efforts to combat impunity in terms of all the crimes that they are victims of. Therefore, we reaffirm the need to deal with this from a gender-oriented side, because the assassination of women and female journalists has increased tremendously. The safety of journalists is of the utmost importance, and also efforts to combat impunity. We have stepped up protection measures, all relating to bringing to justice all crimes against journalists that are an issue for freedom of expression. We stand together with the friends that defend the freedom and safety of journalists. For civil society in Colombia, all those issues that relate to protection and safety of journalists and, of course, freedom of expression are at the very forefront of our agenda, and we have ever more time and space available for their discussion. By conclusion, let me say that we remain committed to the United Nations plan in order to strengthen peace, democracy, and development throughout the world. Thank you.
We are staying in South America, and we're moving on to Chile, to the ambassador and resident representative of Chile in Vienna, Rodrigo Antonio Olsen Olivares.
Ladies and gentlemen, on the 10th anniversary of the UN Plan of Actions, we would like to take this opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to promote a free and safe environment for journalists and media workers. Journalism represents one of the most critical manifestations of freedom of expression and a cornerstone of democracy. However, journalists, camera persons, photojournalists, and communicators put themselves in danger every day to carry out their work, especially in conflict situations. One of the pillars of the government of Chile is to strengthen democracy. In this regard, we are fostering initiatives to promote a media system that is independent, free, pluralistic, and diverse, and protects both freedom of opinion and expression, as well as the right to information. We are committed to strengthening the rights associated with communication and information and reinforcing the journalistic exercise in a diverse media scenario. Chile has persistently condemned censorship measures as a human rights violation, representing a more far-reaching attack on the collective right to freedom of expression and access to information. Democracy requires a free and open debate on matters of public interest and access to information. Moreover, Chile has undertaken concrete measures to protect journalists and communication workers. In this regard, last June, the government announced it is working to implement a legal mechanism to protect journalists, and communications workers that will guarantee the safety of those who have the courage to speak up. We also wish to draw attention to the multiple challenges that new technologies impose on the defense, on communication workers, media freedom, and media pluralism. Trends in digital security should be widely debated, recognizing the critical role that journalists and communications workers play in society. We reiterate our commitment to promoting the exercise of human rights in the digital context, particularly regarding freedom of expression and access to information. Chile is fully committed to take further actions to promote a free and safe environment for journalists and media workers. We stand ready to engage in further discussions on these critical topics and cooperate further with the state representatives, stakeholders, and civil society in implementing the plan of actions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So we have a few more pledges to go. I understand that we might be getting a bit tired, so make sure to roll your shoulders. I don't have time for another exercise with you, otherwise I would. And please give a warm round of applause to the Ambassador of France to Austria, Gilles Picou.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to use the French idiom in this conference, in this international conference. So, now in French. La participation.
The participation of France, ladies and gentlemen, confirms first and foremost our long-standing commitment to freedom of the press, and furthermore illustrates our activities in the multilateral context, because the safety of journalists is not just a manifestation of freedom, a vector for democracy, but also, of course, indicates international solidarity. Victor Hugo, our poet, spoke in the middle of the century, press which sheds light in spirits also creates creativity and a fraternity. We are very much committed to the safety of the men and women, providing reliable information. Several recent initiatives show this. The Afghan journalists receiving shelter in France, but also the creation of a platform in Bucharest supporting Ukrainian journalists, and the presence of Mrs. Colonna, our foreign minister, in New York on the occasion of the second Partnership Summit in connection with Reporters Without Borders, an organization which was created in France at this point in time in Vienna, and we are deeply indebted to the organizers, the government of Austria, the High Commissioner, and UNESCO, draws attention to the fact that the lives of journalists are still threatened, and that there is often impunity, which is why we continue to be mobilized in multilateral fora, in UNESCO in particular. Our multilateral commitment takes the form of participation in the Intergovernmental Committee for the Development of Communication. This is a true cornerstone of pluralism and specific activities, financial contribution, which was voluntary in nature, in favor of the media to UNESCO, to the tune of 580,000 euros, in excess of 2.5 times what we gave in 2021. Furthermore, there's a World Fund for the Defense of Media, for Eastern European and Asian journalists, and an intergovernmental development program, as well as the provision of protective equipment for journalists in Ukraine. These, ladies and gentlemen, are the steps that illustrate the multilateral activities, which is the subject of this 10th anniversary commemorative meeting. Freedom, justice, and solidarity all come together and are very much supported by France, by our civil society, and by the government that I'm honored to represent here. Thank you. Dankeschön.
Next again, we have a video, and this time it comes from Greece, from the Foreign Minister of Greece, Nikolaos Dendias.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is such a great pleasure to participate, even if it's virtually, in today's conference, marking the 10th anniversary of the United Nations Action Plan on the Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity. I would like to congratulate my dear friend Alexander, Minister Schallenberg, and wish him a speedy recovery. Also, the Director General of UNESCO and the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. 2 days ago, we commemorated the International Day to End Impunity for crimes against journalists. This day was proclaimed in 2013 by the United Nations General Assembly resolution. The latter was originally submitted by Greece and a core group of countries, Argentina, Austria, Costa Rica, France, and Tunisia. The safety of journalists is also addressed in the resolution submitted to the United Nations Human Rights Council by Austria and a core group of countries, including Greece. The above constitute significant documents for the protection of journalists and media workers. Our renewed commitment to the implementation of the United Nations Action Plan is more relevant than ever. For states, translating the priorities of the Action Plan into coherent national policies is a crucial endeavour. Greece recently established an inclusive national task force on the protection and safety of journalists and other media professionals. The aim is to develop a common framework of actions in this field and to further promote freedom of expression and media pluralism. Women and young journalists, as well as digital journalism, are given priority. Strengthening relevant national legal frameworks is of paramount importance. I would like to stress the role of the United Nations, which is pivotal in ensuring greater system-wide coherence. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights plays a crucial role in promoting, protecting, and respecting the rights of journalists. On enhancing accountability, the contribution of UNESCO is deemed extremely significant, especially through the Observatory of Killed Journalists. Furthermore, other relevant initiatives proved beneficial for effective international coordination, such as the Media Freedom Coalition, as well as the US-led Summit for Democracy Initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, the UN Plan of Action has a clear objective: the creation of a free and safe environment for journalists that guarantees media freedom. It paves the way for resilient democracies, sustainable peace, and development worldwide. It falls upon all of us to turn this noble goal into tangible reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on stage with us from Brazil, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Brazil in Vienna, Nelson Antonio Tabachara de Oliveira.
Excellencies, journalists and media professionals, ladies and gentlemen. As a member of several groups of Friends for the Protection of Journalists, Brazil follows closely with grave concern the growing threats to the safety of journalists, including in countries in situation of conflict and in violation of international human rights. As an essential element of democracy, states must ensure a free and safe environment for journalists, especially women journalists, to perform their work safely. In cases of violence against journalists and media workers, full, transparent, and independent investigations must be undertaken with the cooperation of all parties involved. Ensuring accountability for crimes committed against journalists is essential for the prevention of future attacks. As stressed by Resolution 51/9, presented by Brazil, Austria, and a group of countries at the United Nations Human Rights Council last September, states and all other relevant stakeholders should take the opportunity of the 10th anniversary of the United Nations Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity to strengthen the implementation of the Plan of Action over the next decade. Brazil takes this opportunity to, firstly, declare that it endorses fully the political declaration issued today, and to reiterate its pledge to safeguarding freedom of expression. Free debate and exchange of ideas and opinions are crucial for the democracy to thrive. As we recognize the challenges related to the proliferation of disinformation, we will continue to safeguard freedom of expression, including in the internet, in accordance with our national law and international standards. In Brazil, journalists are included in public policies designed for the protection of human rights defenders. Since 2019, our national program for the protection of human rights defenders, communicators, and environmentalists, the PPDDH, implemented by the Ministry of Women, Family, and Human Rights, explicitly encompasses the protection of social communicators such as journalists. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that was the quickest one so far. Unfortunately, I have to bring one announcement at this point, which is it's 4:45, and this is the time when our interpreters have done a really good job and need a break. So I hope that we will be able to also continue without them. And I'm very happy to welcome on stage, next from Iceland, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Iceland, Kristín Arnardóttir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, distinguished guests, I am honored to participate in this conference on behalf of the Icelandic Minister for Foreign Affairs, Ms. Þórdís Kolbrún Reykfjörð Gylfadóttir. Freedom of the media is high on the agenda of the Minister, and she has announced the doubling of Iceland's contribution to UNESCO's International Programme for the Development of Communication this year. We do all need to double our efforts. In the past years, we have witnessed the most serious deterioration of media freedom in decades and an alarming rise in disinformation, first in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, then Russia's unjustified and brutal war against Ukraine. Never has it been so important, as important, to protect journalists and media workers and the freedom of expression. Promoting human rights and fundamental freedoms is a top priority for Iceland. During our upcoming presidency at the Council of Europe, we will place freedom of expression and the safety of journalists on the agenda of the Committee of Ministers, highlighting the importance of media freedom for our democracy. Madam Chair, I have shortened my speech statement. We commend the courageous work of journalists and media workers on the front line of wars, ensuring accountability by documenting, investigating, and reporting on war crimes and human rights violations. Outside the conflict areas, media workers face the threat of imprisonment, legal harassment, and even threats to their lives. Women journalists are often disproportionately targeted by harassment, both online and offline. This persecution and harassment of media workers presents a threat to our democracy and society as a whole. It is our duty to safeguard the freedom of expression and protect journalists. A free and independent media environment is fundamental to the functioning of our democracies. Without a free press, there is no accountability, no security, and no true freedom. I thank you.
I thank you. That was surprisingly exactly the same time as before, 2 minutes 22. Let's just say that's the new time. All right, next on stage, please welcome with me the Ambassador of Italy, Stefano Beltrame.
Thank you, and Let me start by congratulating the government of Austria and Minister Schallenberg for organizing this important convention. And I would like to wish Alexander Schallenberg a fast recovery. Thank you for your effort. For the sake of brevity, I will not go through the list of concerns about freedom of speech and safety of journalists we have been debating for the last 2 days, so I refer to the speech which will be published, the official speech, in the final documentation. Let me just focus on the fact that 10 years after the endorsement of the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity, Italy renews its commitment to promote media freedom and media pluralism, as well as safety and protection for journalists and media workers, both at the domestic and the international level. At a domestic level, let me stress that among the more recent policies, we have public funding devoted to ensure pluralism of media outlets in Italy. We also have specific measures to address information needs of linguistic minorities in Italy. We have interagencies, multi-stakeholder coordination to monitor, prevent, and respond to threats to journalists and media workers, and a whole-of-society effort to build resilience against disinformation and misinformation through media literacy, critical thinking, and education. Let me also record the European side of that. We support the unprecedented effort to set the European Union as a regulatory benchmark in the promotion and protection of media freedom. To this purpose, we are negotiating a specific regulation, the European Media Freedom Act, which will foster plural and free media at continental level. I will skip all the international foreign organizations to whom we give a contribution. Just to mention one last addition, Italy is contributing to the UNESCO Global Media Defense Fund. We believe ensuring safety of journalists and media workers, as well as building a conducive ecosystems to develop free and plural media, requires a multi-stakeholder effort and the most effective dialogue among governments, regulators, media, publishers, academia, and public opinions. Italy stands ready to be an active part of such a dialogue at all levels, and we, of course, support the final political declaration of this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I feel like the closer we get to the end, the shorter the pledges, which is an interesting dynamic. Please welcome on stage next Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Uruguay, Juan Carlos Ojeda.
Buenas tardes, excelencias, distinguidos colegas, señoras y señores. Uruguay reitera su firme compromiso con la vigencia de los derechos de libertad de expresión y asociación y la protección de los periodistas y con el Plan de Acción de Naciones Unidas sobre la seguridad de los periodistas y la cuestión de la impunidad. En el 2014 se aprobó en Uruguay la Ley de Medios que promueve el pluralismo de los medios de comunicación y reconoce la importante función que desempeñan, en especial para el efectivo ejercicio de los derechos humanos. Por otra parte, Uruguay ha apoyado las relatorías del Sistema Interamericano y del Consejo de Derechos Humanos sobre la libertad de opinión y expresión. En las recomendaciones del examen periódico universal, nuestro país ha priorizado los derechos a la libertad de expresión y asociación y a la protección de los periodistas, respaldando también el mandato de la UNESCO en la materia. Uruguay forma parte de la Coalición Internacional para la Libertad de Prensa en Ginebra y de los grupos de amigos de periodistas en Nueva York y Ginebra. Nuestro país se encuentra entre los líderes de la región en materia de libertad de expresión y opinión y considera que estos derechos deben ser garantizados en tanto pilares de todo Estado democrático y por ello asegura el libre desempeño del trabajo de los periodistas y su difusión en cualquier formato o plataforma. En el ámbito interamericano, nuestro país integra el Grupo de Amigos de la Libertad de Expresión y el Periodismo, creado en mayo de este año en ocasión de la Conferencia Global del Día Mundial de la Libertad de Prensa organizada por UNESCO en Punta del Este. Uruguay lamenta que se asista a un incremento en la magnitud y el número de ataques contra periodistas y otros trabajadores de los medios de comunicación, así como de las limitaciones o sanciones que menoscaban el ejercicio de su trabajo. Frente a estos desafíos, los Estados debemos seguir priorizando la transparencia de la gestión gubernativa, garantizando el acceso a la información pública, protegiendo la seguridad de los periodistas, así como fomentando la existencia de medios independientes. Por otra parte, consideramos necesario fortalecer las alianzas público-privadas y contar con la colaboración de los gestores de plataformas de redes sociales. Como firmante original del Compromiso Global por la Libertad de Medios, Uruguay reafirma su compromiso irrestricto con el derecho a la libertad de expresión, garantizado en su marco constitucional y legal. Como Estado, suscribimos la obligación de garantizar la rendición de cuentas mediante la realización de investigaciones prontas, imparciales y efectivas de todos los delitos contra periodistas. Los medios libres son la piedra angular de la democracia y no pueden ser debilitados por la impunidad. Para finalizar, Uruguay se enorgullece de haber sido desde el pasado mes de mayo sede de la Consulta Regional para América Latina y el Caribe, coordinada por la UNESCO en el marco del Plan de Acción, y de la Conferencia Global del Día Mundial de la Libertad de Prensa, a la vez que nos congratulamos en el día de hoy de acompañar la declaración política resultado de esta conferencia. Muchas gracias.
And please be aware that this speech is also available on the website in English. Next on stage, please welcome with me Charles d'Affaires from the New Zealand Embassy and Permanent Mission in Vienna, Joanna Diesing.
Thank you very much. Aotearoa New Zealand is committed to promoting and protecting universal human rights at home and around the world, both because they align with our values, but also because we know that they are essential to peace, security, and prosperity in all our countries. As we have heard today, the killing of journalists and the impunity of perpetrators negatively impacts efforts to promote peace, security, and sustainable development. The resulting self-censorship can also deprive society of information and further impact press freedom. This is why New Zealand joined the Media Freedom Coalition in March 2021 to help combat those growing threats. Since its inception, the coalition has undertaken critical work to defend media freedoms and the safety of journalists. We strongly support the work of the Media Freedom Coalition as a means to provide expert advice and pool global efforts. Aotearoa New Zealand is committed to playing its role to help stop the backsliding in democratic norms, including media freedoms, freedom of expression, and the safety of journalists. This is why New Zealand strongly supports the UN Plan of Action on the safety of journalists and the issue of impunity, and why we contribute to other initiatives focused on media freedom, including UNESCO's Global Media Defence Fund. Colleagues, media freedom must not be taken for granted, and we are committed to working with you all to promote and protect it. Thank you very much.
That was a new winner at 1 minute 22. We have two more of the pledges, and these are not coming from countries, but rather from institutions. So please welcome on stage next the head of the Information Society Department of the Council of Europe, Patrick Penning.
Thank you so much. And since I'm between the break and the rest of the session, I will be very short. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I hear for the Council of Europe, I only have 3 key messages. The first is we cannot simply continue to admire and repeat the problems on which we all agree. We cannot simply refer to already adopted resolutions, recommendations, and declarations, but we have to focus on practical solutions and good practices. Second, the Council of Europe added another P word to the Plan of Action of the United Nations in preventing, protecting, and prosecuting. We also want to promote We want to ensure that states have a positive obligation to create a positive climate to media freedom, freedom of expression, and safety of journalists, which is based on our common values that we stand for. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot pledge internationally and deny nationally. We have to act nationally and locally. Third, Council of Europe focuses on the involvement of all stakeholders, journalist organizations, media actors, civil society actors. We shall not only speak about them, but speak with them and give them the floor. They are the actors of media freedom. They are the actors in the protection of journalists. We fully endorse, therefore, the political declaration of the conference, and we as Council of Europe will launch a campaign on the protection of journalists to involve all stakeholders, to involve all international organizations, to be organized at local and national level, and I have taken due note of those states that have indicated that they would create or are in the process of creating national committees established in a multi-stakeholder platform. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much. And as the final pledge of today's pledging session, please welcome with me on stage the Senior Director of Partnerships and Outreach Europe at Internews, Abdurrahman Sharif.
The best for the last. Excellencies, distinguished guests, I'm here to talk about a specific initiative that we have started, which is the Media Freedom Cohort, together with the governments of Canada and the Netherlands. Born out of the 2021 Summit for Democracy's Year of Action, the Media Freedom Cohort brings together civil society groups, private sector partners, academics, philanthropists, and policymakers to grow global commitments to media freedom around the world in preparation for the second Summit for Democracy scheduled in 2023. It is co-led, as I said, by the governments of Canada and the Netherlands, building on their leadership as the co-chairs of the Media Freedom Coalition, and by the international media development organization Internews, which I represent. The work has been broken down into 3 priority areas. A first working group will focus on protection of journalist safety and security in both physical and digital spaces. It is co-led by the ACOS Alliance and IFEX. This group will also take forward the recommendation made at this high-level multi-stakeholder conference on safety of journalists. A second working group will aim to look at legal and regulatory frameworks required to advance media freedom worldwide. It is co-led by the high-level panel of legal experts on media freedom. And the third one, finally, is co-led by the US and UK governments, together with the Global Forum for Media Development, GFMD. It will look at funding models, industry standards, and public policies that support the resilience and professional capacities of media outlets to survive and thrive in the coming decades. The focus of this cohort is twofold: to learn from each other and exchange best practices, and to maximize commitments of concrete action. The cohort will work both to advance the commitments made in the first summit and possibly make new and concrete commitments that lead, and I stress, to measurable and systemic progress in improving media freedom in one or more of the 3 priority areas. It recognizes that commitment in all of these areas can be made at the domestic, national level, or as part of international engagement, and will encourage multi-stakeholder participation at either level in all of the 3 priorities. To ensure an inclusive process, the Media Freedom Cohort is open to every country involved in the Summit for Democracy, organization or stakeholder participating. And it's wishing to make a substantive commitment to improving media freedom during the Year of Action. We welcome your contributions and encourage you all to join the Summit for Democracy's Media Freedom Cohort. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, and let's take a deep breath after all the pledges that we've heard. And it's now my pleasure to welcome on stage for a specific challenge of actually doing a final reflection on all those pledges, the President of the 41st UNESCO General Conference, Ambassador Santiago Irasabal Murao.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank all ministers and governments representatives for the meaningful pledges heard during this session. The 10th anniversary is an opportunity to pay tribute to all journalists and media professionals who have worked hard and several times have risked their lives to ensure our access to reliable information. It is also an opportunity to take stock of the challenges and to propose new ways to progress in the creation of a free and safe environment so they can continue to do their jobs. This is indeed a critical moment. Freedom of expression has been threatened as ever before. Today, being a journalist is one of the most dangerous professions across the world. Women professionals have in particular been the target of violence. They have faced online abuse such as harassment, sexist discrimination, and threats of sexual or physical violence. This situation has been aggravated by the pandemic, favoring deliberate attacks on the press and disinformation that has become more pervasive and widespread. Although the use of digital technology has allowed great opportunities to strengthen freedom of expression, facilitated access, production, and sharing of information, we also have testified the rising of hate speeches. There has been indeed a great change in the way that this disinformation and hate speeches are being disseminated, a change that has notably been intensified in the last years by the creation of multiple online platforms. And ironically, those who attack freedom of expression revindicate this right to justify violent attitudes and opinions, inciting hatred and discrimination, putting at risk the good governance and the rule of law. One must not confuse, ladies and gentlemen, hate speech, which constitute a serious crime, with media criticism, an element of democratic debate. This is why journalists remain as one of the most crucial activities for the protection of citizens and the construction of peace. Quality journalism must find the condition to enable individuals to make informed decisions about their societies and the future of the planet. Ladies and gentlemen, my friends, freedom of expression is a human right, essential for building a just and peaceful world. The flow of ideas flourishes through dialogue, through the interaction of the diversity of views and opinions. This vision is at the heart of the Sustainable Development Goal 16 of the 2030 Agenda, and its target is to ensure public access to information and protect fundamental freedoms. In the last 10 years, some positive efforts have been made at the international and the multilateral level to protect journalists and freedom of expression. Over 20 resolutions of safety of journalists have been approved by the United Nations Security Council, the United Nations General Assembly, and the Human Rights Council. A relevant group of friends have been created in the United Nations headquarters in New York and in Geneva, as well as in UNESCO. And the coordination between the different secretariats has been enhanced to scale up action. Together with the President of the United Nations General Assembly and the Human Rights Council, I also issued a joint declaration on the occasion of the celebration of the World Press Freedom Day to call for building a safer environment for journalists and media workers, as well as for protecting the right of every citizen to reliable and often life-saving information. I think we all recognize the need to reinforce our common action. We see this in the Windhoek Plus 30 Declaration of 2021, underpinned by the UNESCO member states in the last General Conference, which reaffirms the importance of treating information as a public good. As the United Nations agency with a mandate to promote freedom of expression, UNESCO has continued to step up efforts to strengthen member states' commitment to advance policies and laws to preserve journalists from interference and threats while ensuring universal access to information, including through internet. The complexity of the issue calls today for a better balance between regulation, responsibility, and security based on the principles of human rights, openness, accessibility, and multi-holder participation, as stated in the Rome X principles championed by UNESCO. The forthcoming Global Conference on Internet and Democracy for Democracy that will be convened by UNESCO next February is an important step to take this vision forward. Ladies and gentlemen, education is another part of the answer. In the last years, UNESCO has worked to support the training of judges, to sharpen the work of law enforcement professionals, and international standards related to freedom of expression and the safety of journalists in partnership with institutions such as the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and the Brazilian National Schools of Judges. Our organization is also harnessing the power of education on media and information as a crucial component for the exercise of human rights, by preparing the young generation to think critically about the use of freedom of expression online and offline. We are preparing the ground for a positive change. Everywhere we see global awareness rising, and this is paramount. The fact that we are all gathered here, representative of member states, civil society, private sector, and other actors, demonstrate that the international community is fully engaged in the strategic and action-oriented debate. In this spirit, I wish to thank the government of Austria for the organization of the successful event, and I also thank all the participants of the high-level conference for standing up for freedom of expression and the values we share. Obrigado. Thank you.
Hello. 7 minutes. I didn't want to take out the hook at last. I think this has been such an overwhelming session, and there are even more pledges on ministerial level than have been made that unfortunately we cannot show you right now, but at least let me name them. There are more pledges from Norway, the Czech Republic, Montenegro, Costa Rica, Andorra, Poland, Slovenia, the Netherlands, Cyprus, Switzerland, and Latvia. And I think that deserves a big round of applause. It's been over 2 hours. We've heard more than 30 pledges live, and as you heard, there are plenty more. Please make sure to visit the website where you will find all of them online as well. Thank you so much for your patience, for staying with us. Thank you to everyone who made it for a pledge.